one of the media partners that helps support Travis and Franco. And it's a little outside of our wheelhouse because it's more real estate oriented, but we're all about architecture, engineering, and construction. Just a brief about the Architects newspaper. We've been publishing 15 years. This is our 15th year anniversary month. So it feels really good to be here and get through all that we've been through in the construction and architecture world in the past, say, 8 years or something. But we publish nationally, and we talk about architecture and design news. We have a very active website, a lot of newsletters. We have a conference called Facades Plus, and we also have a technology conference called Tech Plus that we do here in New York, and we're going to take it outside of New York City next year. So this has always been a big interest to me, technology across my whole career, even before starting the Architects newspaper. And we were working with people that are no longer really doing technology in New York. I don't know if you guys, I don't know what the audience is made up of here, but Control Group was very big in 15 years ago. Case with David Fano and that whole group who are all now at WeWork. They were bought by WeWork, and you know that continues to spin out and absorb people. I know Thornton Tomasetti recently lost someone to WeWork as well. So this is really interesting. I mean, it's a little outside of the wheelhouse, I think, of what PropMoto normally covers and talks about. So I'm really interested to hear. We have somebody from architecture, we have somebody from fabrication, we have someone from construction, and somebody from engineering on this panel. So across the spectrum of what they're doing and how they see the future of buildings happening. So what I would like to do is each of these people are going to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about who they are and what they're doing, and then we'll get into a discussion. So Eli, if you want to kick it off.
Thank you very much. My name is Eli Gottlieb. I'm with Thornton Tomasetti. We're an engineering firm based here in New York City, but global. And we've been very focused over the last few years on how does technology advance, how do we advance innovation within our industry. We've started actually an R&D group and a technology services group to sort of push ideas and push fabrication, technology. How do we rapidly deploy new ideas, and how do we advance the design and construction effort, right? Because the time frame that it takes to go from the initial idea that somebody comes up with to actually delivery of a product on site, and then how do you live through the life cycle of that has been one of the big pressures in the industry that's been going on. So, you know, getting to projects that we can start and be rapidly under construction in just a few months, delivered within a year before the market shifts or changes, and then how does that actually respond to the changing environment, the sustainability, and the flexibility that's required for all our projects going forwards. We've just been finishing up actually the Hudson Yards project in New York, which has had a lot of focus on how some of those different things got done as one of our larger pieces very locally.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm the one with the name that's a tongue twister, so it's Satyen Patel. Nice meeting all of you. 6 years ago, we established a tiny little company that nobody's ever heard of called Prescient. It's been an amazing 6-year journey for us. We are both a software and a hardware company. I'd like to think we're the only one of its kind out there that actually designs, engineers, manufactures, installs, and finishes complete buildings. Before I invested in this company that I'm a leading shareholder of and the exec chairman of 6 years ago, I had no background in construction or real estate. So it's kind of one of those stories about where fools rush and where angels fear to tread. Right? So it's been amazing learning for me. My background is engineering. I went to business school at Michigan, British citizen, moved over to the US about 7 years ago when I invested in this company. Prescient is, like I said, the quiet disruptor. We are the meeting point of architecture, engineering, construction, and development, and we do all four. We have a collaborative software platform, and that's 1/3 of our company. We have a 150-person software engineering design development center that integrates with our state-of-the-art manufacturing operation that uses laser cutting, robotics, etc. And then we actually go out and install our own buildings up to 17 stories high, made out of light gauge steel. And we use the Revit platform, and our app works on the Revit platform. And we use artificial intelligence to develop a fully integrated BIM model of the building with a fully delivered BOM very early in the stage. And we've been doing this thing, like I said, for 6 years. We've built over 5.1 million square feet of buildings in 16 states, 6 NFL cities, as I like to say, and moving on to achieving that presence in all NFL cities with the exception of probably Green Bay. When I approach a developer and we talk about our product, our company, and our buildings, and by the way, the 5.1 million square feet represents about $1.1 billion worth of development over the last 6 years. We're the ones who actually come in and we talk to developers and we say, at every stage of the evolution, whether it's for architects, for GCs, or for developers, we impact time, money, and risk. I'd welcome you to go to our websites, see our product. And like I said, we're the quiet disruptor. We're bringing the digital world to the physical world. And it's not just a cliche. We're actually doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Stoll. I'm an architect and an urban designer at a mid-sized firm here in Manhattan, and we have a Houston office as well called Rogers Partners. And I would say we're generalists, so we do everything from smaller scale buildings like schools or other cultural institutions to large scale residential development, to then some even larger resilience projects that we're starting to get involved in, particularly around Houston. So the way we interface with technology is very varied. It's everything from how we draw and deliver our designs to dealing with resilience on every level, from the building scale to the urban scale. And then technology within buildings. Envelope is obviously a huge issue. Envelope, energy efficiency, how we think about the future in that way. So that's what we do.
Hi, I'm Greg Howes. I'm a very geeky builder. I worked in software and I worked in technology. And my current goal is, how do I make the building industry more of a technology-driven industry? I have a Swiss wood engineer partner. We have a factory in Portland, Oregon, where we have a lot of CNC machines and robots, essentially prefabricating wood buildings. It's a good market in Seattle and Portland because those states produce the most wood in the nation. There's a large group of companies doing this globally, but most the industries in Switzerland or Germany is much more advanced. And so my objective is, how do I bring those technologies, localize them, make cross-laminated timber buildings, wood skyscrapers, passive house. Business is booming, things are very good, the strong markets on the West Coast. The challenge we have is an implementation challenge. How do we find people within real estate and design who want to embrace these technology-driven building solutions? So it's a people problem much more than it is a technology problem. In order to identify the people, we also started architecture, engineering, construction hackathons, AEC hackathons. We've held 35 of them in 22 cities in 8 countries, including twice in New York. The next ones are later this month in Guangzhou and Shanghai for the 3rd time, and then Copenhagen, Seattle, and Silicon Valley. Those are nonprofit events, the objective being, how do you bring the technology industry together with the construction industry and hack the industry? Find new solutions. So you're finding people who opt in to want to use digitalization. And it's worked really well. It's an incredible networking opportunity, and we want to find other people we can work with to push forward.
So I'd like to ask, I want to understand who the audience is, because I know that we're going to talk about stuff that maybe you've never heard people talk about before. You know, when I started a facade conference 8 years ago, I didn't know anything about the facade of a building, and now it's my life, and it's really, really important to all of us, and we all are in buildings that have facades on them, and this is where most of the energy of your building is lost. So there's a huge movement and push from a manufacturer, from the engineering, from the architecture, construction, to fix buildings. We have a lot of old buildings in this country that were built about in the 70s. The government owns a lot of old buildings. So, you know, there's a lot of technology that's happening within just fixing the outside of the buildings, windows, sealants. So, you know, that's something that we can kind of talk about as well. But what is the makeup of this audience? Real estate, raise your hand. Mostly real estate. Any architects, contract? Great, a couple of architects. Engineers, contractors? Very good. So we do have, I'm hoping that you can hear some new things and learn from what these technology people are doing. So, you know, the thing I'm always asking and interested in is what is actually happening that we can see and feel or touch within a building that's being implemented. You know, there's a lot of startups and different companies that are trying to get their product spec'd on a building, used in a building, but actually where do you see some big gains, and maybe each of you can answer this, where do you see big gains happening with something new that's out there that's kind of blown your mind?
Well, there's, you know, from our side of things, a lot of what's happening is the technology of implementation. So we're writing a lot of computer programs, and it's been touched on a couple of times here, where we're actually using AI to actually more rapidly get to better solutions for the projects and understand actually what has been done on previous projects, so understanding all the history and decisions that people have made about what they want in their projects, and how do we bring that forwards faster and actually get all the information from everything that's been done on our projects and other projects to be able to more rapidly actually generate and execute things. So that's actually happening, and it's happening for us both in the physical structures, the materials going into it, but also the facades, the sustainable things, and then in sustainability, pushing into that has been mentioned with Passive House. How do we actually radically reduce the energy consumption of our buildings, and how do you do buildings that meet, you know, Passive House kinds of standards for almost no energy usage at all, but also do so in a way that you've actually got very, very low carbon input into them, carbon sequestration, potentially even with timber buildings. And these are things that are all coming, and they're starting in different pieces of the country. There's some more of it that, you know, with the timber that's, you know, focused in the Northwest, but that's actually, you know, rapidly coming even to the East Coast. There's multiple new plants opening here. There's efforts that are happening here in New York on some of those sides of things. So those are a couple of pieces that we're working on, and then the other piece of it, you know, I think is going to turn right into what Satyan's been working on with Prescient is, you know, how do you use modular, and how do you use some of that technology to be able to also, you know, more quickly develop and execute projects. So those are some of the things.
Great.
Look, I mean, if you look at this industry in a macro perspective, the next 5 years will see more change happening in this industry technology-wise than have happened in the last 50 years combined. Productivity in this industry has been at an abysmal low. I don't know how many of you have seen the charts that McKinsey always talks about, where amongst the 15 contributors to the US GDP, with construction being the #2 contributor at $9 trillion, construction is only one level above hunting and agriculture in terms of digitization, right? It's surprising, I didn't even know there was a category called hunting and agriculture. But anyways, the point is the opportunity in the bar is pretty low in some ways, and it's all about eliminating waste. It's such a disparate industry between, and to some ways not being from this industry helps because you don't carry any baggage. You come at it, look at it from a software perspective and say, wow, this is wide open canvas. I think there's going to be a significant amount of savings coming out in terms of integration through a collaborative platform between architects, engineers, GCs, and developers to eventually impact IRRs, return on equity, and return on capital. I think there's going to be significant advances in automation that comes through the utilization of robotics, laser cutting, et cetera, but most importantly, off-site manufacturing and modular construction, not just for the structure, but including mechanical, electrical, plumbing. I'll give you one example, and I love this example because there's two industries that actually have proven that it works. In the 80s, the automotive industry went down that path when the onslaught from the early Japanese came in with the first Honda CVCCs, if you remember. And the automotive industry today, if you look at the same plant in which Henry Ford did the first Model Ts, where they still make the F-150s in Dearborn. In those days, there were 2,000 components to the car, and they assembled each and every one of the 2,000 components. Today, in the same factory, they probably assemble less than 150 components, because a lot of the stuff comes in pre-manufactured. Like your entire dashboard comes in one kit. Your seats come in one kit. Your wheels come in with the tires on it, lo and behold, right? So those kinds of things the auto industry has achieved significantly by going to the platform and platform-based solutions, right? Where there's one platform that makes the Ford Taurus, the F-150, the Focus, whatever. That's also happening. The other industries that have done it is basically your iPhone. I mean, if you think about what the iPhone has done and what that whole smartphone industry has done is amazing, right? Design is the core of it all, and how it's all assembled wherever in the world hardly matters. I mean, the final product comes out together through sub-assemblies. So there's amazing revolution happening over there between the integration of software, design, manufacturing, and installation. We're just at the tip of the curve, and there's room for so many different players. There's room for so many different substrates, whether it's wood, concrete, steel. But the opportunity is amazing. I genuinely believe the next 5 years are going to see dramatic change in this industry.
Well, for us, I think the dream is the more integrated process, because we begin often with a client doing programming or massing studies that are aspirational and idealistic, and over the course of the process of design and construction, our struggle is to hold on to those ideals and design aspirations all the way through to a finished product that is still on budget and is on schedule. So obviously we've made big strides in terms of design software, in terms of being integrated amongst ourselves as a design team with things like Revit, where we're all working on one model, and we don't have issues, or we cut down on issues on site because of that. But the bigger kind of frontier, I think, for us is exactly what you're talking about, where we can control what happens after the documents leave our hands, or even be involved more intimately in the process of how our buildings get built. And for us, part of it is, I think, again, to talk about envelope a little bit. There are so many ways that getting your building up and enclosed can impact schedule and the ultimate outcome of your building. So the more of that we can do off-site, if we can bring the envelope in some modular way on-site, ready to go, to be erected, then that cuts out so much of the kind of lost in translation potential of any design. So I think sometimes we're looking at things like precast concrete, where we can put insulation inside and be incredibly energy efficient. We can have glazing installed off-site, and those pieces can come to the site ready to erect. Those kinds of things are, for us, just the way that we can eliminate risk while still really delivering an amazing architectural experience.
I think the construction industry essentially needs to learn from other industries. Think of automotive or aerospace as they increasingly become a data-driven and technology-driven industries. We can apply those same things to that really big asset class called building. And it's essentially, at the end of the day, more efficient bits to buildings. How do you do that in scalable ways? And as building becomes more complex, we have to develop systems to do that. We can't magically wait for highly skilled workers to magically appear to build all these buildings in scalable ways. And I think the future of the building industry, to paraphrase, is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. I'm often in Europe. Again, my business partner, my wife is from Finland. My business partners are from Switzerland. All of our robots are from Europe. At our AEC Hackathon in Finland, it was hosted by Sweco. Sweco has 15,000 employees, architects and engineers. And after the event, there was a lot of amazing AI and robotics, all kinds of machine learning. And then the Sweco representatives asked me, what's happening in the US? As if I could answer for the entire country. And I said, well, you have 15,000 employees. What's going on in your US office? He said, well, we don't know. We don't do business there, so we have no idea what's happening in the US. So it's shocking to me that in different countries, solutions are coming to both real estate, fintech, and building. Faster, better ways to do things, but it doesn't travel across borders, even within the same company. I'll use Skanska as an example. Another global company. The Skanska office in Seattle generally doesn't communicate that much with the Skanska office in New York, which certainly doesn't communicate much with Skanska Sweden, where Skanska's from. I say that because I was in the Skanska office in Sweden, and they're like, well, we're really too busy to pay attention. But I don't know why our industry reinvents the wheel so much, when I think the best way to innovate is to look who's already solved that problem, and then let's localize and scale that.
I think you make a very good point. If you guys are all from the industry, I mean, I'm the newcomer here, but one of the things I found is most countries and most industries have tremendous gravitation in terms of polarization of clout, right? What I mean by that is the top 10 GCs in the multifamily space, which is what we're focused on, right? Which is apartments, housing, condos, student housing, hotels, senior living, armed forces housing, and employee housing. In that space, the top 10 GCs control only 7% of the national market. Right, so you put in Turner Construction, you put in J.E. Dunn, you put in Suffolk, you put in whatever, put those 10 in. 6 to 8% of the national market. So think about how distributed this industry is. There is no critical mass. No single company drives it. So it's the landscape here being such a large country. I mean, it's like when you realize that North Carolina is the size of the Swedish economy and Texas is the size of the Canadian GDP and on and on and on, and California is the number 9 country in the world. Each of these states are mega countries in themselves, and they have powerhouse GCs over there or developers that are localized. We do a lot of work with Trammell Crow. Very successful with the Denver office. I've done over, 800,000 square feet of buildings with them. But try penetrating their Atlanta office or the Seattle office. I mean, they're totally king of the hills in their markets, and there's no synergies being shared. I see that in architectural offices, whether it's Humphreys or Niles Bolton, and we work with all the big guys. Very little interface. So this is a huge market and a huge economy. And I think what happens is, I've also realized that there's no secrets in this industry. If somebody has a better way to make a mousetrap and a widgets and wombats, then it suddenly spreads like wildfire. But with no single developer or no single GC or no single architect really influencing the national landscape, you realize that there's huge opportunity for eliminating waste.
I would just follow on and say, I mean, absolutely, the risk of waste and these things, and that the lack of penetration of any one driver is huge in everything that we're doing, and yet, and as you say, you know, it is an open source market, right? Like every idea just spreads immediately. I mean, there are proprietary products and things like that, and actually, oftentimes a proprietary product inherently doesn't spread because here people don't want to deal with proprietary products when you've got such a diversified market, and sometimes it's actually a struggle to deal with. I mean, one of the things that we've been doing is as we've been writing different engineering software and different things like that, we've just made it open source. We've actually made it something that's actually something that can spread out in the industry. If we're realizing if we're coming up with the idea, somebody else is coming up with the idea too, and the goal for us is to be out ahead of that and trying to move the industry forwards. If we can move the industry forwards, we can integrate better, we can get top to bottom integration and design all the way through fabrication and delivery, and really try to push the markets in some of these different pieces.
I mean, horses for courses, right? I mean, we've taken the absolute opposite approach. It's almost the Apple model. We're a closed system. We have 75 patents in 30 countries, 64 more on file. It's a collaborative platform, so we bring architects, GCs, and developers on our platform. And the whole idea is to bring the industry on our platform, but through the 6-year process, we started the building process with just giving the structure. Now we do elevator shafts, then we did stairway shafts. Now we include stairways in them. Now we're integrating Kone elevators into our product because one of our board members is from Kone, from Helsinki. And then we're now including metal decking to it, and now we're including sheathing to it to be closed-in conditions. And we now collaborated with Pella to bring in windows into the whole thing. So the whole idea was to build together a platform that's bespoke. So all our buildings are designed bespoke by architects. We bring them onto our Revit platform, or our app works on the Revit platform. So slightly different strategy, right? But there's room for so many, and the whole reason we're doing it is once a Balfour BT figures out that this platform works for them, where we can impact time, money, and risk, then it mushrooms through Balfour BT. We've seen that happen at JE Dunn, the GCs. We're seeing that happen now with other GCs like Suffolk out of Boston. Same thing on the architect side. So, I mean, we see some architects actually absolutely absorbing it and saying, we will absolutely imbibe this stuff and run with it because it makes our practice much more profitable. After the first building is designed, they realize in the second and third buildings, their margins go from 25% to 75% on a project. So some of the architects are coming in because it impacts their P&L, they get productivity, whatever. So I think we're at the absolute cusp of a revolution in adoption. There's going to be, in the next 5 years, this industry is going to create leaders and laggards. And the guys who are going to win are probably going to be the guys who are most adept at adapting new technology, right? Some of you are from the GC world here. You know better than anybody. This industry is full of old dogs. They don't like change. Margins are razor thin. You talk to any GC, 2% to 3% margins. There's no budget for R&D. Very few GCs have any budget for R&D, much less for even software platforms to integrate, much less integrating software and hardware, right? So it's a huge challenge on the other side, but what will happen is this industry is also like a bunch of lemmings. Once the first few move in, the others follow, right? We've had so many developers come to us and say, we want to wait till Trammell Crow finishes the 5 buildings. And then we'll come behind them, Mill Creek and NRP, and a whole bunch of them right behind them. Anyway, I don't want to monopolize this, but
Well, I would like to put it out to the audience. I'd like to go back and forth. Does anyone in the audience have any questions about this? How it's, go Frank.
I mean, we've seen it in a lot of projects that we're working on, the idea of mixed use, the idea that things aren't single use anymore, and that people are looking to reposition older infrastructure to meet modern needs. So we've done, you know, right now in New York City, there's an incredible effort going on, especially with the Midtown East rezoning, but in a lot of the properties, to reposition a lot of the older 1950s, 1960s, 1970s buildings to try to meet modern standards in a changing workforce, right? So that goes from everything from upgrading the envelope systems, upgrading the mechanical systems to have a better living environment for everybody in the buildings and to be much, much more energy efficient in what they do. So there's a lot of things that go in there, but then there's also a lot about bringing just in new services and flexibility of services and flexibility of space for rapidly changing environments, whether they be, you know, mixed residential and commercial that's happening, or commercial with other retail spaces and office spaces and mixed use spaces like we're in here today. So these things are happening all through New York City right now on a lot of our projects, whether it's, you know, 601 Lexington, 399 Park, you know, the whole strip up and down Park Avenue in Madison. And then you really see that in what, you know, Related's done at the Hudson Yards, where they're really building, you know, the intent there is to build this incredible mixed use community there. It's a city within a city, right? But where they're trying to create that flexibility and the dynamism of being able to serve a changing population with different expectations within it. So some of those kinds of things we're seeing, in a lot of the existing infrastructure through the city, at least from the structural and engineering side on a regular basis right now.
I'll take that as well. I'll reference a company called City Builder that's based in Seattle, which essentially uses artificial intelligence to, using regulation, pricing, and zoning to identify highest and best and most profitable use for a specific property. I think that's ramping up. There's going to be more and more of that. But ultimately, in a sharing economy, offering space as a service or buildings, even if you can determine highest and best use, and you're involved in that transaction, how do you then build a building? And then that you may build a building, then how do you modify the building so it continues to be its highest and best use? I think the innovators within real estate and fintech who are determining and embracing that, and then using technology to embrace the customer base, the client, so people can engage with that, they need to engage with the most technology-driven construction companies so they can offer scalability to build what you want, and you can offer more on time, on budget. So the digital people in each of those categories benefit by working with one another. You can also try a vertically integrated model, Katerra, you may have heard of them, 1.1 billion, one of the biggest investments, where you have a one-stop shop that offers everything. The other model, but I think that has its own challenges. The other model, I think, is individuals. Again, it's back to people. It can be individuals at massive architecture, engineering, or real estate companies. Those individuals working in digital means with the most digitally progressive construction and design companies. So without the vertical integration, you can still adopt efficient best practices. Get the geeks together from different industries.
When we collaborate with our clients, often the conversation is about what is the building going to be used for now, and how do we need to plan for what's ahead? And depending on the scale of that project, it could be, do we need to plan for building additional stories in the future? How would that impact building code, for example? We can't pick certain kinds of construction because they won't translate well to additional stories. Sometimes it costs more to build in flexibility like that. So those are challenging decisions, I think, for the entire team. And then on the larger scale, if we're doing, for example, a mixed-use development, right now, maybe parking is important. And then we're looking toward the future and saying, driverless cars are going to change this, and you're not going to need this parking garage. So how do we design a parking garage that's able to be transitioned into being mixed use or co-working or residential in the future? And what are the sort of design parameters that we need to put in place to allow that flexibility to happen? And we're looking at that in places from the city to the suburbs at this point.
I can't speak for the office industry because that's not our focus, but I'll speak from the multi-unit housing industry, right? So if you step back for a minute, and this is very live and very serious an issue in parts of the nation. We all talk about affordable housing, right? Government subsidized housing, but if you leave that aside for a minute, there's a bigger challenge in this nation about just attainable housing for everyone. Right? Just attainable housing. I'll give you an example. The poverty line by the mayor of San Francisco was put in at $109,000 per person. If you're making less than $109,000 a year in San Francisco, you're below the poverty line. Well, if you're two of you making that kind of money, you still think about it. At $5 a square foot rental rates, an 800 square feet apartment takes away one whole paycheck. 48,000, that's 50% of your thing, gone. The other paycheck now you have to use to pay utilities, your car insurance, your car payment, your food, your groceries, your apparel, whatever. Huge challenge. Trust me, the real estate industry is very much wired into this whole place because at the end of the day, if the math doesn't work and your pro forma doesn't pencil, this is a challenge that the nation faces in different levels in different cities across the nation, right? So how is the industry attacking it? The real estate guys really know it. I mean, they do the math every which way, slice it, and they say, we can't deliver this apartment unless we get a $5 per square foot return in San Francisco. So technology is coming to address that in so many different ways. I'll give you one example. We're actively looking at this right now. We're working with an MIT offshoot. Think about the amount of space you use in an apartment. If you're in New York City, you spread your arms and you touch the walls, right? I mean, if you're in Europe, a 400, 500 square foot apartment is a pretty luxurious apartment. We're spoiled in this country. Minimum 750 to 850 is a one-bedroom apartment. Depending on where you sit in the apartment at that particular time, that space is the most important to you. You really don't care about the other space that you're renting. You're beginning to see, and it's going to happen sooner than later, probably in the next 12 months, you'll see a lot more that we're incorporating that also. Start thinking about a shell with sliding walls, right? If you're sitting in your living room, dining room, come kitchen, or whatever, in a 500 to 600 square feet micro apartment, or even lesser, 460 square feet, all you care about is when you're watching your football game with your friends is how much space do you have there? You don't care what's going on in the bedroom and the other parts of the house. Similarly, when you're sleeping at night in your bedroom, you really don't care about whether your living room is. Servo control motors are coming in where you're going to have sliding walls and you're going to still retain your cabinetry. And we're going to incorporate that in some of our micro apartments coming up in Denver and also in Durham, North Carolina. And you'll see those buildings out next year. And it's an offshoot from MIT that's coming. You got to think a little nonlinear. They're also thinking in the third dimension. I don't know why, but they're also thinking about moving ceilings up and down through servo control motors that you could then use from your iPhone. By the way, these are not brutally expensive either. If you eliminate framing walls and everything that you don't need to do in a shell, some of these units cost $11,000 to install, and it's on a railing on the side of your wall and stuff, and you're going to see this. There's innovation coming to this industry. So what now you're doing? You're building flexibility into your apartments in terms of how you want to use it. Maybe you start off with being a single millennial using it or a retiree using it, and then maybe when you get married, you have a different idea about it. So the flexibility of what you can do with your space, as long as you protect the 500 square foot space and find different ways of using it. You may not move your bathroom around, but you can certainly move the walls of your bedroom, your dining room. Even your kitchen can be extended if you're doing a Super Bowl party or whatever. There's some amazing things going on, right? With technology. It's coming. And you know, it's a forcing function, right? It's all driven by cash. If you have to deliver a $3.50 or $4 per square foot attainable housing project in San Francisco, necessity becomes the mother of invention and you attack it very differently.
Very good. That's interesting. I haven't heard that one yet. That'll be good for the sliding door industry. Anyone have a question? They want to? Go ahead. Do you know what that means? Digital, you want to take that? Greg?
I think it's oversold generally. Digital twin, essentially, I can do reality capture, and I'm not talking about a Matterport scan of this room, but an exterior scan and a 3D scan, and then in construction, we talk about BIM or building information modeling. For me, I don't even like that terminology. I'll go deeper. Sorry, Tim, you say fabrication information modeling. For example, the Seattle Central Library, pretty iconic structure in Seattle. At one time, Huffman Construction was managing 250,000 CAD models of that one building at one time. So digital twin, which one of those 250,000? And also
tell you from our industry, I mean, the industry we're focused on, which is not building museums and places like this. If you're doing 500,000 square feet multi-unit apartments, the sophistication level, even if it's a A1 building of our customers and client base, they don't want to invest even in a 3D BIM model. You ask them, you're going to pay $200,000 to have a BIM model. Just so happens our model is such that it just spits out a BIM model because we can't work any other way. Because you work with the architect on the platform, and then the platform throws out through AI a fully engineered BIM model and a fully drafted out, automated bill of materials. basis which we can give pricing, and then we force the architects and everybody else to freeze their window designs and everything early in the game so we can start manufacturing it using advanced manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. That forces the industry to go in a certain way, right? But you ask this industry to pay for it?
I would just, following on that, I mean, we work in that same sort of format where we're building BIM models and fabrication models, where we're building all the way to the digital detail to actually produce, deliver, and erect the materials, even four-dimension, four-time modeling on things that we're doing. And we do that because it's advancing the design process, the delivery process, everything that is going to it. And there are some clients that are interested in maintaining that down the road, especially for certain aspects of the project that they might maintain, certain mechanical systems and life cycles and things like that. But the other thing that we've seen is that some of these models, we developed these models and the technology is changing so rapidly, right? So we've been pushing BIM technology and fabrication technology for 20 plus years in the way that we work, but the programs that we used 20 years have evolved. The programs that we used 15 years are no longer the same. The programs that we used 5 years are no longer the same, right? So if you try to take models, right, they're done for a specific purpose right now, and we're trying to get more and more life cycle out of those. But inherently, if you take that and you put it on the shelf in your building and you say, I'm gonna come back and look at this in 5 or 10 years from now because I wanna do something, then the technology's out of date and all of a sudden it's moved on to something else, right? So it's how do you embed the information and how do you capture and make that information valuable down the road, because it's the data that's embedded in the model. It's not that it's a Revit model, it's not that it's a Tekla model or an SDS model, it's the data that's in it. And so our focus is really on how do we capture that data, how do we move that data from platform to platform to platform so that we maintain the usability and functionality of that information to be able to augment the process and use the process to renovate, modify, maintain buildings down the road, and then even get to life cycle and energy capture information and things like that on the building.
So I want to we have 2 more minutes, and I want to get the audience, a couple more questions from the audience. So I think there was show of hands in the plaid shirt.
Well, if you look at the trend lines going on globally, right, urbanization is here to stay. And it's not happening just with the youngsters, it's also happening with the 55 plus generation, right? I mean, that's happening globally, right? That doesn't mean suburban areas won't have a room to play once the kids get to be 35 years old and they have 2 kids and they want backyards or whatever. But this phenomena of urbanization for the foreseeable future is not going to change, right? You can still use these shells for other multi-unit applications as the thing evolves, whether it's senior living, hotels, whatever, depending on how you design some of these structures and buildings. Increasingly in P3 projects, we're finding out that even though P3 projects need to be done over 20-year periods where you have a lease back and then you give it back, in some cases, employers and owners of the universities and all are saying, we want to probably make sure that after 10 years, this could be used as something other than student housing. So you design in things like having to use that more as a market rate apartment. By doing that upfront and you design it in, you can achieve some of that stuff, right? I don't think urbanization is going away anytime soon with the configuration of population growth, lifestyle choices, especially as we go to more and more driverless cars and stuff and public transportation.
The other thing we're finding is that the suburbs are becoming more like cities, and in places where you never would have imagined someone would be willing to live in 500 square feet. That's what people are looking for. And what I find fascinating is that what millennials want and seniors want right now appears to be the same thing. They want walkable neighborhoods. They want it to feel urban. They want everything within a stone's throw of where they live. And they want a sense of community. And that's, in order to achieve that in the suburbs, we're finding that we're making suburbs more like cities. And even though you might be saying, we're doing a development right now that's that's on parking lots of a mall where the owner of this real estate said, we're not using all these parking lots anymore. We need to convert this to residential. Now, I wouldn't have imagined people want to live in multifamily, mid-rise, residential next to a mall, but if it feels like a city, people want to live there.
Well, do we have time for one more question?
I mean, I think that there's so many projects. I mean, bespoke was mentioned before, and real estate is the largest bespoke industry out there. Every project is done on site, by hand, with micro components all going together, as opposed to looking at larger scale systems. And thinking about that from the beginning of design with a real integrated design process that goes all the way up to and engages with the contractors and the fabricators who are going to deliver the project. I think that's the first thing that I'm actually seeing is making inroads, and it's something that's done on a lot of big projects, but there's a lot of small and mid-sized projects that aren't even engaging at that level yet in this country. And I think that that's sort of an initial first step, and that real integration from full design team up to the fabrication team and everybody being on board with shared success with the delivery of the project is I think, one of the very, very first steps in successfully delivering those kinds of projects across the country.
Philosophically, the single biggest thing that will impact this industry is standardization. And it's an oxymoron, standardization. It's a paradox. You might think standardization means you're building Soviet-style apartments. No. How do you do design for manufacturing and design for construction and yet marry aesthetics with construction? We work with a lot of developers. I'll just take one sector, student housing. And I can say the same thing for hotels, and I can say the same thing for apartments. But let's say student housing. We work for the top 5 developers there, CA, EDR, whatever, name them. Very rarely do you find a project being built in Madison, Ann Arbor, Chapel Hill, Athens, Georgia, by the same developer using the same smart plans and duplicating it. There is so much waste in the industry. And I asked the question, why does a student really care that if he has a building that looks exactly the same in Wisconsin, Madison, that he's not going to rent the apartment or the building in Ann Arbor, where my daughter is, or in Chapel Hill, where we are? That kind of stuff. We're beginning to impact that, right? And that doesn't mean the shell needs to look the same. That doesn't mean the building looks the same. But you're beginning to see unitized solutions coming to 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartments that you can put together in a building block, almost like what Fisher-Price does with Little Tikes, stuff like that. It's beginning to happen. So I think standardization will allow, believe it or not, for a lot more solutions to happen that are bespoke. It's an oxymoron, but it's happening.
Okay, I'm going to be the devil's advocate, being on the architecture into this. I look at so many, I love looking at Trulia. I love looking at Trulia and looking at apartments, and they all look the same, and it's so boring. So I hope we don't move to that kind of model, because, I think people that live in Ann Arbor, Michigan are different and want different things than the people that live in the South or Texas or California. So with that, that was a great question. Thank you. I think we're going to end this panel. If you guys have other questions, these guys will probably stick around. But thanks, PropMoto, for having us here. It's been fantastic. Thanks, panelists. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're going to take a break for lunch. So we got a Michelin-rated chef that is preparing the meal.